Story 1. I went to the Harris Teeter near my work kinda of ritzy area early Friday morning looking for some cantaloupe. The parking lot was mostly empty. As I pulled in, I saw a very stereotypical woman velour bedazzled sweatsuit, leather handbag, tan skin, high blonde ponytail with dark roots, looks to be anywhere between 35 and 65 years old, depending on the light, unloading her cart into her blinged out Land Rover. I parked in a pull-through spot 1 row away from her. As I'm getting out of my car, I watched her fling the shopping cart into the parking lot, when there was a court corral 3 spaces away. My sense of justice was piping hot that morning, so I turned to her and said loudly, "Wow, that's pathetic. How lazy can one person be?" I was shocked that shame actually worked. She retrieved the cart and returned it to the cart corral. I kept walking towards the store. Guess who followed me? And I got to the curb right outside the door. She was about 10 or so feet behind me when she started yelling. She started with, "Who the fuck do you think you are? You stupid fucking cunt. You don't tell me what to do." I did what I do best. I ignored her and kept walking. She followed me into the store and kept yelling. Girlfriend was definitely drawing attention. I was making my way to be fruits and veggies with a basket in hand when she grabbed my shoulder. I turned around and she put her finger right in my face. I screamed, "You will not ignore me." She continued yelling and spitting and just being a general troll. I took a step back and looked around because I was honestly a little afraid. She grabbed the basket out of my hand and threw it to the ground. It hit my foot and bounced away. Thankfully, there was an employee in the fruit and veggies section, and he saw the whole thing. He came forward and tried to defuse the situation, but entitled troll was determined to, I don't know, beat me up, yell, let me into submission, continue to make an ass of herself. I'm not really sure what her goal was. He tried to engage her and asked her what was wrong. She continued fuming loudly about disrespect and how I had no idea who her husband was, etc. With her attention diverted, I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. At this point, there were 3 or 4 people around, one of whom was the store manager. As I was on the phone providing information to 911, the manager ushered me away from Crazy Karen and asked me what happened. With the entitled Karen in the background still fuming, I explained the situation to him and the 911 dispatcher. I emphasized that this woman put her hands on me, grabbed the shopping basket from my hand, threw it down, and that it hit my foot. I wasn't injured, but you better believe I was playing it up. I'm not sure where she went while I was on the phone, but she wasn't in the fruits and vegetables section when the police arrived. It wasn't anything special. They took my statement, provided me an incident report summary, and asked if I wished to pursue criminal charges. Of course I did. I left shortly thereafter because I had to go to work and I was already going to be late. Since this just happened on Friday, I haven't heard anything. I'm honestly not quite sure what I'm going to do, but I'm toying with the idea of pursuing the criminal charges. There's no physical injury, and it's not like she would wind up in jail or anything. However, actions have consequences, and I would love for her to experience at least some of those. I never did get that cantaloupe. Story 2. Last year, I lived with my then-girlfriend. This turned out to be a huge mistake. Soon after moving in, it became clear that she expected me to cover her rent from time to time. As she was between jobs, I let this slide, expecting to be paid back in due course. It was a similar story with household bills. While she paid her share to begin with, she eventually refused to contribute. I asked her if she could just open an overdraft with her bank till she got more work, which would have been free of charge, but she refused. Within the first few months of living together, she got quite behind on rent and bills. When she finally got a job, she began to catch up on arrears, but was always reluctant to pay. I thought she might be reluctant because it left her with little money, which would be fair enough. But things continued this way even after she got a better job. When she refused to pay rent 1 month, I explained that this wasn't fair and insisted that she pay up. After considerable outbursts, she paid, but not without making it clear that this wasn't what she wanted to do. During this argument, I was in a different town working, and a few days later, she let me know that she'd moved out and broken up with me. I was upset with a breakup, and further upset that she insisted she didn't still owe rent or bills, which left me in a dire financial position. To cut a long story short, she realized her mistake and came back a few weeks later, but with a renewed conviction that she didn't owe me anything because her return was payment enough. The next few months consisted of her threatening to leave at multiple points for not supporting her enough, despite me buying most of our food, letting her pay late, and bringing her lunch every day. She even repeatedly threatened to kill me one night after coming home drunk. I thought this was especially rude considering I'd stayed up late to make sure she got home safe. Other notable events were her and her mother having a deep discussion on how to leave me high and dry on rent. Her mother was a classy lady, and her getting verbally abusive that I wouldn't drop her name from the tenancy agreement must have thought I was stupid. Needless to say, the relationship wasn't meant to be and didn't last into the new year. Ex-girlfriend ended it. She eventually moved home, but agreed to meet her obligations and pay her remaining half of the rent. Some time after this had boiled over, I met a fantastic girl, and we eventually got together. Happy days, I thought. Not quite. Ex-girlfriend discovered I had met someone else and absolutely lost it, calling me all names under the sun, calling me out for betrayal, etc. She didn't consider that breaking up with someone might make them not want you anymore. Incensed, ex-girlfriend stopped paying. At the time I hadn't been keeping track and thought she owed me around £300. After she calmed down, she agreed to pay. A few days passed with no payment when I got a message from her mother claiming everything was paid and to stop asking her daughter for money already paid to you. She went on to say that any further requests for money could be treated as harassment. At this point, I was irritated by the entitlement and rudeness of the pair, and went back through my bank statements to check exactly how behind on payments she was. It turned out the shortfall was more than double what I initially thought, so I prepared a formal letter of demand for payment and posted it to ex-girlfriend's address. Several days later, I got a call from the police saying that a harassment report had been made against me. I explained the situation, and the police confirmed that no harassment was made. I was surprised that my ex-girlfriend would waste police time to try to get out of paying the debt, and decided to take revenge to obtain justice. I discovered that for the entire period of our tenancy, my ex-girlfriend hadn't been paying council tax. Essentially, she hadn't told the council she lived there. I took it upon myself to inform the council that there was a second person living at the property avoiding tax. They were appreciative of this information, and further appreciated me furnishing them with an up-to-date home address for my tax dodger ex-girlfriend. In parallel, I took my ex-girlfriend to court over the unpaid rent and bills using the tenancy agreement we signed, and got the majority of it back. Edit. I'm a full-time student, thus I'm exempt from council tax. Also, I was very stupid to stay in this situation. But that's rose-tinted glasses for you. Story 3. As described, we were all welcomed home with a threatening letter in our mailboxes declaring that we are in arrears and, of course, would be subject to property liens, etc. I myself presided over a voluntary homeowners association for a period of 10 years that considered this conversion, due to the difficulty of obtaining dues annually to pay for real-world improvements to the neighborhood. When we went door to door annually, we would even bring financial statements to show where the previous year's budget was spent. I've never met this homeowners association president, have never met my district representative, or know who they are. I looked up the homeowners association on Division of Corporations in Florida and got the president's number. When I called him, he said they only needed 50% resident approval to proceed, and that was obtained. He assured me the process was legal, the dues are legal, the penalties for non-payment are legal, etc. He also doubled down when I told him I would consult a real estate attorney this week. I asked that he kindly provide financial statements for the last 12 months, but he gave me a combative reply by asking what I needed it for. I know the things homeowners associations pay for, and this neighborhood does not provide any of them. The road frontage is maintained by the golf course. The pool has its own rather steep membership fees. The street lights are assessed by the tax assessor. There are no common areas. There is a derelict park that the last 3 visits I made, no kidding, has physical evidence of animal torture and sacrifice. Dead household pets that have been ripped apart and left under the gazebo with spray-painted messages on the concrete. Garbage everywhere in the park. It's literally not maintained on any level. Does voluntary to mandatory conversion not require 100% homeowner approval? It did in 2000 when I considered conversion as president of my old homeowners association. Also, I did report the animal abuse to the police. Update: I was a homeowners association president for the 10 years I lived in my old home. The new president would have me perform all functions. They were more comfortable making the change on paper only. I bought my new home and made sure it was in a voluntary association neighborhood. This was the case in my old neighborhood, and I'm very familiar with the differences from a mandatory HOA here in Florida. We were never given info on where to send dues, and there was never a dues drive, where a representative would come to the door and ask for money. No newsletter, no accounting of funds, no communication. In 2020, I received a notice of lien on my home. So did all of the neighbors I polled. All 9 immediate neighbors I asked, except one. He just built his home and joined the board. He stated that in 2019 they voted the homeowners association into mandatory status. I showed him that my deed has no homeowners association on it, and my closing paperwork shows a voluntary homeowners association. He's from California and said that he was unsure of the legal merit of their tactic, since he's new here and to the board. But as the new secretary, he witnessed the end of the process insofar as the paperwork came back from their attorney and was filed as a now mandatory homeowners association. I got the board president info from him and contacted him. When I told the president this tactic is absolutely not legal, he told me they paid $6,000 to a reputable addy and is rock solid and hung up the phone. I brought my documents to his home and knocked on his door, and he said basically the same thing and shut the door in my face. He handled inquiries from my immediate neighbors in the same fashion. After lengthy discussions with my new neighbor/secretary, he left the board due to doubts of the merit of their measure. Then the entire board quit. A new board stepped in and got a 15-minute briefing from the old president. They continued to operate under the advice that we now have a legal, filed, binding mandatory homeowners association. I attended their first meeting and showed them precedent after precedent in Florida where this is not legal. They had already filed 48 new liens, mine was one. As their first measure, they hired an attorney to pore over the whole filing of the homeowners association, and after $7,000 expenses, they were told that every aspect of this homeowners association was out of compliance. The only legal thing about it is that the limited liability company filing is proper. They now have to rescind every document back to the originals from 1963 and start over under the official advice that it will never be mandatory since it'll prove to be impossible. So they are reverting back to original by laws, covenants, conditions, restrictions, and vacating all liens, along with sincere apologies from the new board for the actions of the predecessors. I did not spend a dime. Oh, and there's no way I'm joining a homeowners association board. I will, however, bring copies of my vacated liens and those of my neighbors to the old president with a smile on my face. Story 4. I live in Asia and recently purchased a new house. The previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and hadn't lived in my country for almost 3 years. I managed to get the house for a great price right in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the start of this month, and I moved in right away. The house needed a lot of work, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation. The main door was secured with only a padlock, not even a proper door lock. The property had no gate, which meant anyone could just walk in. On the first day I moved in, I found someone's bike parked in the garage. I moved it to the road and had a gate installed the same day. Later, an angry man knocked on my new gate, likely looking for his bike. I didn't answer, but I watched from the window as he gave up and took the bike after waiting for about 15 minutes. This experience didn't exactly endear me to the neighborhood. However, after that, I had no major incidents aside from occasional misunderstandings. People didn't realize that this was no longer an abandoned house, and sometimes my gate got blocked. But after I put up a no parking sign, that problem was resolved. Last week, I was in the bathroom taking a shower when I noticed that my water pressure was lower than usual. I also heard my next-door neighbor's water pump running. This neighbor, an elderly man, lives in a 3-story house, with the first floor as his residence, while the other 2 floors are rented out. This neighbor wasn't happy about the house being sold. He had expressed many concerns to my friends, the previous owners, and was pretty upset about it. My friends had warned me about him, but I'm a 6-foot-tall guy with 3 dogs, so I didn't think he would try anything with me, and he hasn't, so far. With this kind of setup, a water pump is necessary to get water up to the rooftop tanks, as the public water supply's pressure isn't strong enough to reach all 3 stories. When I heard his water pump running, I immediately grew suspicious. Coincidences exist, sure, but it wouldn't hurt to check things out. I waited until his pump turned off, then tested various taps in my house. As soon as I did, the pressure returned to normal. This made me even more suspicious. If he was indeed taking water from my lines, it would explain the steadily rising water bills that had been an issue even when the house was vacant. The house did have some leaks, but the bill was still unusually high, and now it was all starting to make sense. At some point during the past 3 years, this neighbor must have decided to save money by accessing my property's water. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where he was siphoning it from, but after several checks, I was pretty sure he was taking water from my lines. I mulled over my options for a few days. Should I confront him, go the legal route, or just let it slide? The cost wasn't the main issue. Water is inexpensive here. Even with washing 3 animals, cleaning a car weekly, and watering the garden, my total bill is about $5 a month, even with the neighbor using some of it. What really got to me was the principle. It's about entitled people who feel they're allowed to use others' resources without paying, thinking they'll just get away with it. That didn't sit well with me, and I wanted to teach him a lesson. My solution was simple. I turned off the water at the mains. I didn't need to trespass on his property or break any laws. It was the best way to deal with him without lifting a finger. On Monday, just 4 days ago, I waited until his pump started running, then shut off my water supply. Here, household water tanks operate with a ball valve that senses water levels and signals the pump to activate. When the water level doesn't increase, the valve stays open, and the pump continues running until the level rises and the valve closes, turning off the pump. But with no water flowing, the pump ran dry, which can damage it. I figured this would cause him trouble with his tenants. What I didn't anticipate was that the constant running would strain the wiring, eventually blowing fuses and damaging his electrical system. His house still has wiring from the 1990s, so if he had upgraded, he might have avoided this issue. Around 3 a.m., I heard everyone in his house waking up, whispering about why their home was the only one without power or water. I learned about the power outage because his tenants soon began yelling at him. Our tenant protection laws are strict here. Power and water are essential services, and cutting them off without valid reasons is grounds for legal action. Landlords are responsible for keeping wiring up to date and ensuring water supply, so his tenants were understandably upset. One of them even moved out 2 days later after learning that repairs wouldn't be finished right away. Both tenants filed complaints with the police. In cases where there's a clear breach of regulations, the police can impose fines directly without going to court. If the accused believes the fine is unfair, they can challenge it, but they still must pay upfront. So now, my neighbor lost both tenants and has to pay a $500 fine, which is significant here. He also has to return their security deposits and cannot rent the property out until both issues are fixed, which will cost him even more. Currently, he's planning to move in with his daughter on Sunday as he can't afford to live alone. His tenants were his only source of income, and he's a retired mechanic with no other means of support. He eventually figured out what happened and came to my gate, asking if I had turned off my water. I replied, "Oh, yes. My tank had a leak, so I turned it off until the plumber could fix it the next day." The look on his face was priceless. He tried to keep it neutral, but I could tell he was holding something back. He just nodded, said, "Oh, okay," and walked back inside. I don't know if he realizes that I know about his setup, but I'm not worried he can't do anything about it. Next week, I'm hiring a plumber to secure my plumbing and remove any lines that exit my property. So, I managed to solve my water problem and prevent future issues with a troublesome neighbor, all by turning a tap. 2 birds, 1 stone, I'd say. Story 5. This story is from my dad and other family members who witnessed the events. Background. The events took place in the late 1970s when my dad was 17. He grew up in a working-class town in the United Kingdom, known for its close-knit community despite being run down and struggling with crime. In this town, everyone knew each other, which would later prove to be important. My dad wasn't exactly a model student. He disliked school and wasn't the best-behaved kid. However, aside from a speeding ticket, he never got into serious trouble with the police. He was, and still is, a talented musician with a vibrant social life. For his 17th birthday, one of his friends, whom we'll call Dave, gifted him a leather jacket with a unique logo. According to my dad, it was a rare and expensive motorcycle jacket, and he was thrilled to receive it. Dave had bought the same jacket for himself a while before, making the gift a surprise. My grandmother joked that with their similar looks, dark hair, and motorcycle gear, they resembled twins. A few days after my dad's birthday, as he left his bartending job in the town center around 10 p.m., a group of 5 men approached him from behind. The last thing he remembered was being struck on the head and passing out. These men attacked him with bike chains and a crowbar, leaving him severely injured. Thankfully, 2 bouncers from a nearby pub heard the commotion and rushed to help. The attackers fled, the bouncers called the police, and my dad was taken to the hospital. It turned out that Dave had a serious gambling problem and owed a lot of money to some dangerous people. They had threatened him, promising to teach him a lesson. So, Dave set up my dad to take the beating in his place. He bought my dad the same jacket, knowing that his debt collectors would recognize it, and had someone inform them of my dad's work hours and location. Dave's actions were nothing short of despicable. The revenge. My grandparents were devastated by what happened. My grandfather's first concern was whether my dad would survive. Once that was answered, his second thought was how best to seek justice. A little background on my grandfather. He was a lifelong boxer and a former career military man. He enlisted at the end of World War II at 17, served through the Korean War, and worked as a scout and sniper during the conflicts in Malaya and Burma in the 1950s. Reluctantly, he retired from the service when my dad was young and worked as an engineer. Even in his 50s, he was a tough, resilient man who fiercely protected his family. Grandfather's first move was to reach out to his ex-military friends, bouncers, pub owners, and even some people with questionable reputations. In that town, word traveled fast, and my grandfather was well known and respected. It didn't take long before he had the names and addresses of the 5 men who attacked my dad. These men were career criminals, known for their violent tendencies, but my grandfather didn't care who they were. He then contacted a few of his toughest friends from his service days. He explained what had happened, and they were eager to help. One night, this group broke down the doors of each thug and gave them a brutal beating. They coordinated the attacks on all 5 men to ensure none of them could warn each other. My grandfather knew no one in that area would report it to the police. Speaking to law enforcement was practically forbidden there at the time, so they felt safe from legal consequences. By the end of the night, all 5 men were left battered, with broken bones, shattered teeth, and even the need for tube feeding. One of them had to be placed in a medically induced coma. The police eventually interviewed each man in the hospital, but no one talked, fearing both my grandfather and the stigma of being labeled a snitch. But my grandfather wasn't done. Using his connections in the local clubs and bars, he spread rumors about why the 5 men had been beaten. Word spread that they had attacked the wrong person and then lied about it. Not only did he leave them physically broken, but he also ruined their reputation so that when they recovered, no one wanted to associate with them. With them taken care of, my grandfather turned his attention to Dave. He left Dave for last, knowing that he would be terrified, knowing my grandfather was aware of his betrayal. My grandfather didn't think a beating alone would be enough. Instead, he waited and gathered information, learning that Dave's gambling problem had worsened, and he had developed a heavy drug habit. My grandfather tracked down where Dave bought his drugs and had a friend follow him to confirm his residence. Then, my grandfather made an anonymous call, claiming there was a large drug deal and possible gunfire at Dave's address. 2 friends of his did the same. The police searched Dave's place and found a substantial amount of drugs, along with counterfeit money and other illegal items. Dave was arrested, denied bail, and ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges. My dad couldn't remember his exact sentence, but it was significant, at least 15 years. Dave's life fell apart. He owed a lot of money to dangerous people, and this made his time in prison even worse. His parents disowned him, his girlfriend left him, and he struggled to find work after his release. He eventually had to move far away, as no one wanted anything to do with him. My dad eventually healed, though he still carries the scars from that night. My grandfather never spoke of his actions until my dad questioned him when he became ill in the early 1990s. Dave's life was ruined, and out of the 5 men who attacked my dad, 3 ended up in prison, and 2 died from their involvement in crime. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s. Despite their complicated relationship, no one could say my grandfather didn't stand up for his family. Story 6. So first time making a post. To kind of give people a picture of myself at the time this happened, I worked for the state dealing with public benefits and assistance, supplemental nutrition assistance program, Medicaid, and the like. I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall. I used to be a powerlifter and weigh 340 pounds, so yeah, I'm a big guy. The dress code for the state is business casual, unless you are working at the central office or a public-facing position. I worked on the phones 90% of the time. On the day in question in 2018, I was wearing the one and the only suit I own, being the size that I'm. The suit is tailored. Now, this was a few years ago, so some things will be paraphrased as my memory is faulty. Few too many blows to the head in my youth. I dungeon master for a Dungeons & Dragons game every Thursday at a friend of mine's house. I was in my late 30s, and as I was leaving work, my friend called me and asked if I could pick him up some new dice, as his 3 dogs decided that his dice looked like treats. So I hit a local game store on my way to his place. While I was there, I noticed a frustrated young woman trying to convey something to the owner. She was using American Sign Language, the only other language I understand other than English. I tapped her on the shoulder and signed to her to see if I could help her out. She explained that she was looking into getting into Dungeons & Dragons with some of her deaf friends from school. So I asked her some questions and found that they have never played. But due to the success of Critical Role, they want to try, and she is going to Dungeon Master. I helped her get everything she will need for new players, and she was just so happy that someone could help her out using American Sign Language, and that she thought it was really thoughtful of the owner to learn. I explained to her that she had been working with the owner when I got there, and that I was just an avid Dungeons & Dragons fan, and I dungeon master myself, and that I was just stopping in for some dice. She looked at me confused and signed. "So you don't work here?" "Nope, just wanted help since I know sign language." We laughed. So back to getting dice. That's when Karen strikes. She starts yelling at the owner of the store, wanting to know why the owner was spending all his time helping the cute young woman, but would not be bothered to help an elderly customer who just wanted to get her grandchild a video game. This game store does not sell video games. Now let's paint a picture. Karen here is about 5 feet tall, standard Karen haircut, and maybe 240 in weight, and in her early 40s if she has a grandchild that can play video games. Some poor choices may have been made in her past. The actual owner of the store said I help people that come to the counter, and if they need help with something out on the store floor, I help them as best that I can. Then Karen points at me and says no, I'm talking about the owner. The actual owner of the store and I look at each other and at the same time say, "Lady, I do not work here, and he is the owner, and this place does not sell video games." We smile at each other. This is where Karen explodes on why does a game store not sell video games, and what is she going to do now? She waddles over to me and starts poking me in the chest, ranting something along the lines of, I should be nicer to older customers and they are the ones keeping my store open. At this point, I pull out my state employee badge and point at it and say real slow, "Lady, I don't work here, and you can go next door to insert name of big box store that rhymes with Dred Myers." I then explained that by state and federal law, by poking me in the chest, she was guilty of assault. At this point, she sputtered, then slapped me. When I started to talk again, she slapped me again. At this point, I got ticked off, stood to my full height and yelled at the top of my lungs that if she touched me one more time that I would defend myself, and she would not like the results. At this point, the owner has called the police and has the phone on speaker. We all hear when dispatch states that the officer is 2 minutes out. She screams and then tries to slap me again. I catch her by the wrist, spin her around and pin her hand to her back. I grab her other hand and hold both her hands behind her back and at arm's length, so that she couldn't kick me in the shins. This is when the police show up. Now, when you have a guy standing a foot plus taller, holding a screaming woman at bay, cops are automatically going to think that you are in the wrong. Officer 1 lady, Officer 2 guy. Officer 1 comes in first and sees this, says, "Sir, please let go of the woman." I said, "I will as long as she won't hit me again." Karen starts going off on how I hit her and that she was just defending herself and that I need to be arrested. Officer 2, hearing this, pulls his taser and says, "Man, you need to let her go now." I let her go and raise my hands to head level. Karen spins around, kicks me, and then slaps me again. The owner of the shop says that's the third and fourth time she has assaulted that customer. Officer 1 then places Karen in cuffs and escorts her out to the car. Officer 2 is a short guy about 5'8" tall or so, still pointing the taser at me and wanting to cuff me. I explained that was not going to happen as my wrist is too big for his cuffs and that he would need zip cuffs, and that he needed to call a sergeant if he was actually going to try and arrest me. Officer 2 steps back and says, "Are you resisting arrest?" I said, "No, but I will be exercising my rights to a lawful investigation prior to arrest. You know, proven innocent till guilty, and that stuff," as I was then one defending myself from being assaulted by that screaming harridan your partner just took outside. Now if you want me cuffed while you determine what's going on so you feel safe, I fully agree to that. I'm just explaining that my wrist won't fit your metal cuffs. Officer 1 comes back in and says that Karen has been detained and is demanding a supervisor. The store owner pipes in with his side of the story, Officer 2 still pointing a taser at me, and explains that Karen assaulted me twice and was in the process of assaulting me a third time, before I had restrained her. At this point, Officer 2 puts his taser away and then jokingly asks if he can see if the cuffs really won't fit. I hold out my right hand and he pulls out his cuffs and is like, "Wow, they won't fit." For everyone's information, the minimum inside perimeter of the bracelet is 7.9 inches, 20 centimeters, when the ratchet is engaged at the first notch. The maximum perimeter is 6.5 inches, 16 centimeters, when the ratchet is engaged at the last notch. My wrist is 10 inches around. Officers 1 and 2 were both amazed that the cuffs would not actually fit me, and that even if they did due to my size, they would not be able to cuff me behind the back. At this time, the sergeant shows up. He walks in, sees me, and says, "Hey, Rusty, long time no see." I reply, "Hey, Sarge." Long story shorter, Karen was arrested for assault, and yes, I pressed charges. From what I was told by Sarge, this was her 12th incident for similar issues, but the first time she got violent with someone. Story 7. I had a doctor's appointment today, and my mother was taking me and also going in with me because I wanted her to. My mother looks after her granddaughter too on Fridays, but she told my sister at the start of the week that she couldn't do it this week because she was taking me to an appointment. She gave her the time of the appointment, and my sister said that was all right and she would get it sorted. On Wednesday, our mother reminded her, and my sister said she had it all sorted out and her boyfriend was coming over to look after her S&D. He can just stay at the house with her while we're away. Then today, this morning, her boyfriend arrives at our house, and he comes in and he told our mother that he had to be elsewhere for a certain time, so he couldn't actually stay. Apparently he told my sister this, but she never told our mom, so our mother texted her, and apparently my sister replied saying, "Oh yes, sorry, I forgot to tell you that lol." So he drove 40 minutes to our house for no reason because of my sister. Our mother was pissed because in the time frame he had it wouldn't have worked anyway because he had to be back at his house by the time my appointment started. Her boyfriend offered to take his daughter with him, but my mother just said we would take her, which I thought was an awful idea, but she said, "I know it's not ideal, but don't worry, she's normally good at the doctors, it shouldn't be a problem." In the waiting room, she didn't shut up. She was running around singing, and I was just ignoring her and pretending she wasn't there because it was annoying me so badly. Then in the actual office, she was even worse and wouldn't stop basically whining and shit, all while we were trying to speak to the doctor. Overall, the experience was awful, and my sister basically ruined the entire thing, and it was all about my niece instead of me. I understand that I could have just went in by myself, but I wanted my mother there, and I didn't think my niece would be as annoying as she was. I just sat in silence the whole way home because of how pissed off I was, and my mother said she didn't even want to speak to my sister because she was also super annoyed about the whole situation.